Up to you.
Thanks very much, Mark. This is Africa News, and no winner again for a huge cash prize for good African governance. Nevertheless, the Mo Ibrahim Institution says there have been improvements across the continent. Also, French President François Hollande talks security and energy whilst on a state visit to South Africa. And as concerns mount about the dangers faced by African migrants trying to make it to Europe by boat, we hear from a Paris-based radio station addressing the concerns of Eritreans still at home. First up, it's the world's biggest individual cash prize, but for the fourth time in 5 years, an award for African leadership has no winner. The Mo Ibrahim Fund pays out almost 4 million euros over 10 years to encourage good governance. Since 2007, though, only 3 men have so far met the criteria of excelling in democratic office and stepping down on schedule, the last being former Cape Verde President Pedro Pires in 2011. Now, the foundation also releases an African Good Governance Index. This year, 2013, Mauritius leads again with a score of 83, with Somalia at the bottom of the 52 with just 8 points. Now, it appears that the gap between the best and worst governed African nations is just getting wider. Nathalie Delepam is the executive director of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. She tells us more.
This is something we are looking at very closely. Indeed, you're right. I mean, basically, the human development and sustainable economic opportunity has been going up, but we do have concern about deteriorating trends in safety and rule of law. And we also have concerns about the fact that inequality is rising on the continent. But for the time being, we don't have robust enough data to measure this inequality rise. And this is something we're working on very closely, as we are working on finding better data for poverty level, inequality, as I said, and employment, specifically youth employment.
A quick look at some other world news. Liberia's ex-president Charles Taylor has asked to serve his half-century jail term for war crimes in a Rwandan rather than a UK prison. Convicted by a UN special court for aiding rebels who committed atrocities during Sierra Leone's civil war in the 90s, Taylor has sent a letter to the court saying it would be more humane if he served his sentence on his home continent. He's also said that he fears for his safety in a UK institution. A notorious Somali pirate chief has been arrested in Brussels after authorities lured him to the country with promises of making him the subject of a documentary. Mohamed Abdi Hassan, better known as Big Mouth, faces charges of kidnapping, piracy and organised crime over the capture of a Belgian ship off the Somali coast in 2009. In January, Big Mouth had announced that he'd quit piracy after 8 years and claimed that he was trying to convince others to follow his lead. Meanwhile, here in France, the trial of 3 Somali pirates has begun in the northwestern city of Rennes. They're charged over the 2009 hijacking of a French yacht. Sailboat skipper Florent Lemasson was accidentally killed by French troops who stormed the vessel in a rescue attempt. Well, François Hollande met with his South African counterpart, Jacob Zuma, on Monday. The French president arrived in Pretoria today on a 2-day visit aimed at strengthening trade ties with the continent's top economy. Hollande also praised South Africa's efforts to stabilise conflicts on the continent. Our Mark Perriman is in Pretoria. He tells us more.
There were tensions, even maybe conflict, with regards to France's intervention in Libya, France's role in the Ivory Coast. However, there has been change since the election of François Hollande. He's a member of the Socialist Party, which has traditionally had good relations with the ANC. And a turning point was the support landed by South Africa to the French intervention in Mali. And now there is coordination on the Central African Republic dossier. The French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius was there yesterday. He briefed both presidents, and they both rang the alarm. They say we need to act because this is a humanitarian catastrophe. There is a political impasse, and it could have regional implications. So we need to act now. However, it doesn't mean we have to rush in. We have to coordinate this with the United Nations, with the African Union, but there's clearly a willingness to have a more coordinated approach, both in Pretoria and in Paris. And both presidents say they need to make sure there are more mechanisms to intervene both diplomatically and militarily on the continent to ward off those kinds of crises. And this issue will be on the menu of a major summit convened by France with all African heads of state at the end of the year in Paris, Security in Africa. And Jacob Zuma confirmed that he will be attending. So there's clearly a rapprochement between France and South Africa when it comes to conflict resolution on the African continent.
Mark Perelman there in South Africa as François Hollande continues his two-day visit. Now, whilst in Pretoria, Hollande also on Monday announced a €1.5 billion deal between French energy firm GDF Suez and South Africa for a thermal power plant and a solar plant. In the past, power cuts have weighed heavily on the country's economic growth and demand far outstrips supply. In a bid to double electricity supplies over the next 2 decades, South Africa is considering all its options, including going nuclear. Our correspondents tell us more.
Koeberg nuclear plant is 30 kilometers outside Cape Town and is the only one on the African continent. But this could soon change. Pretoria wants to build 6 new reactors within the next 20 years to meet the growing energy demand. It was the French who built Koeberg and are now vying to build the other reactors too.
The government has said that it's going, by the end of the year, it is going to probably put up the tenders. There's an awful lot of politicking is going on. The Russians have been here, the Chinese have been here, the French are always here, the Americans have been here, the British have been here. You name it, everybody's saying, you want 6 nuclear reactors, we are here to sell them to you.
Government is taking nuclear energy very seriously due to strict carbon emission restrictions. South African authorities still depend far too much on coal for their electricity. But environmental activists argue that the nuclear industry is not so clean and that the energy demand prediction has been exaggerated. There seems to be no consensus.
Yes, it is a big battle where we have a situation of old white men in the nuclear industry telling my government that they need to play with the big boys because they have to go nuclear to look good, or that it has geopolitical significance to make them important in the world, are the kinds of messages our government has been getting.
While weighing up the pros and the cons, the cost will probably be the determining factor. The new fleet is expected to cost more than €100 billion.
The Mediterranean Sea around the Italian island of Lampedusa has been dubbed the Sea of Death because of the number of boats carrying African asylum seekers that go down there. Many of those who died in the October 3rd tragedy were from Eritrea. Our Nicolas Chemin and Charlotte Prudhomme have been to speak to a Paris-based radio station that broadcasts to the repressive African nation.
The journalist Emmanuel Guillemai speaks in Tigrinya, one of Eritrea's official languages. The country has no free press, so it's from Paris that the independent radio station Irina broadcasts news via internet to Eritreans.
We're talking about the Lampedusa event, which is very disastrous for us, for Eritreans, because it's not a matter of news, but it's a very personal issue for us, because at least we know some of the people who just died in the sea. And we are talking about whether their body is going to be sent to Asmara and to be buried according to our tradition, or just they will lay down in some Italian cities.
Earlier this month, more than 350 people, mostly Eritreans, died when a ship sunk off the Italian island of Lampedusa. The UN says that 3,000 Eritreans flee their country every month. Emmanuel left 4 years ago. He explains why so many of them take this risk.
Not to hold election, and constitution never implemented, and arbitrary arrest was common, and no free press, everything like that, and everybody was forced to stay in the military almost for life. So finally, there was no hope for anybody inside the country.
Emmanuel takes us to the only Eritrean restaurant in Paris where the community likes to meet. Tigay, the owner, says more and more of his compatriots are fleeing.
10 years ago, you only had a few hundred Eritreans in France. Now there are thousands.
Many of the customers here have themselves fled Eritrea. They say they understand perfectly well why so many take the risk of crossing the border on foot, where they can be shot by guards, and then struggle to get to Libya, where smugglers put them on boats for Europe.
They say to themselves, we're going to die here. So let's try and go somewhere else, somewhere we can have freedom and some money to live. If we die on the way, it doesn't make a difference, because we are going to die here anyway.
After the Lampedusa tragedy, the Eritrean government released an enigmatic statement. Without saying precisely why, it said the United States were the most to blame for this catastrophe.
François Hollande, Nicolas Chemin and Charlotte Prudhomme reporting there. That does wrap up African News for me, though. I will be back with more tomorrow, Mark.
Georgia, thank you very much indeed. Georgia Carvin-Smith with African News. We're taking a short break. After that, it's another World News update. Plus, we have, well, among other things, sport for you. And the man who's going to carry the flag for France at the Sochi Olympic Games. He's Jason Lamy Chapuis. In his event, the Nordic combined, 250 delegation in total going to try and, well, bring glory back for France from the snow slope. Stay with us.